Welcome to our Alliant webinar. We are really excited about today's conversation. Couple quick housekeeping things. I always like to go through housekeeping before we jump straight in and rock and roll with the presentation today. All participants are muted upon entry. We do have a Q&A box. Please be putting questions in that Q&A box. For questions, you may turn live captions on. There is a captions button in Zoom. If you have any questions or issues with that, please drop those in the chat. We will answer as many questions as we can live, but as I said, we have a jam-packed agenda for today's call. We are likely going to take a bulk of the time, but we want to leave some time at the end for questions, and I will be watching the Q&A box, and if there's some great questions that are representative of what we're talking about, or we can jump in real time, we will answer as many of those in real time as possible. Final thing, there will be an on-demand accessible recording that will be shared with all of the registrants once it's available. It takes our team a couple days to get closed captions and audio descriptions and everything on the actual recording. We will get that out to folks. It'll be posted on our website. Anyone who registered, so even if you have to jump a little early, totally understand. We will get that out to everybody ASAP. But with that, again, thank you all for attending. We are going to get rocking and rolling with today's webinar here at Alliant, which is the perfect match. Accessibility and third-party procurement, which is a hot button topic in the industry. I am really honored today that I get to just quarterback a session with two individuals who I would call great friends, mentors, leaders in the space, in Aaron Page and Jeff Wissel from Disability In. So I will give a very brief introduction to me and my role, and I'll let my esteemed panelists talk about their roles and what they do in their day-to-day organizations. But I am Ryan Wieland, Vice President of Digital Accessibility Sales here at Alliant. Work very closely with both Aaron and Jeff on the Disability Inside and help a lot of customers through the journey of procurement accessibility. So have a lot of experience in this space over the last 8.5 years here at Alliant. With that, Aaron, I'll go to you first. I'll let you do an introduction, and then we will go to our esteemed guest, Jeff Wissel. So AP, I'll let you give an introduction, and then we'll go to Jeff.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. And thank you all for joining us today. My name is Aaron Page. You might hear Ryan and others refer to me as AP. The short story of that is when Accessible 360, what is now the digital group at Alliant, was formed, we had 6 people on our audit team, and 2 of us were named Aaron. So I got the nickname AP, and now we are 350 employees strong at Alliant, and I'm still called AP. So I love it. This is my nickname. So I am Vice President of Accessibility at Alliant. I founded what we call our Accessibility Claims Team. That is our team of auditors in our digital group who help our customers who've been targeted by an accessibility related lawsuit, demand letter, other form of legal action. I run what we call our Live Our Values program here at Alliant. So as an accessibility vendor, we want to model what it is to be an accessible organization, from procurement to hiring and retention to the documents that we create and use internally. We want all of that to be accessible. And so we call that program Live Our Values. And I like to think of myself as kind of chief accessibility evangelist. So webinars, conferences, trainings, kind of like this. I myself am blind. I was born with congenital glaucoma, lost my remaining vision more than 17 years ago now. Been working in the digital accessibility space for more than a decade. And I started in the space at the University of Montana doing software accessibility testing as part of their procurement program. And so you will hear me kind of refer back to that experience a lot throughout this procurement presentation. So with that overly long introduction out of the way, Jeff, I will pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, AP, and thanks, Ryan, for this opportunity. Hi, everyone. I am Jeff Wissel. I am a white male. I'm 58 years of age, and I am the Chief Accessibility Officer of a nonprofit organization called Disability In, where I have the opportunity to work with over 500 corporations that have a global reach on all things accessibility at the enterprise level, and really get to learn where companies are on their accessibility maturity journey. And prior, I had a 28-year career with a leading financial firm where I had the opportunity to get involved and start and lead some of the accessibility efforts there. So like AP, I live and breathe this 24/7. Today, I'm proud to share that I am legally blind with a degenerative eye disease called retinitis pigmentosa. It took me till I was 48 to find my inner voice with vision loss, my disability, and to realize that it's a strength and not a weakness or a vulnerability that I let it be for some time. And I think that's really important because 70% of disabilities are non-apparent or invisible. We know through the Disability Index, hundreds of companies take every year. Less than 5% of employees self-disclose. So it's important to realize the prevalence of disability. And that's what we're going to talk about today is accessible procurement to ensure that everyone can fully participate, not just perform the task of their job, but to perform at their peak. So Ryan, thank you and to Alliant for this opportunity to be part of this panel.
Thank you, Jeff. We are very happy to have you here, and I know AP and I will be kind of ping-ponging back across and going through the agenda. So today's very quickly surface on today's agenda. We obviously covered welcome and introductions. We're going to talk about our two organizations, just so you have a quick snapshot of both who Disability In is as well as who is Alliant. And then we're going to kind of dive right in, right? We're going to talk about the purpose, which is the importance of procuring accessible technology. Then we're going to talk a lot about that, but then we're also going to talk about the process, right? How do you build a framework for building a repeatable process? Because accessible procurement is not easy, and for a lot of organizations, this is a very new topic, but a very important topic. So both Jeff and Aaron are going to talk about that, and then the payoff, right? The takeaway is to strengthen your internal program. Our ultimate goal today is to obviously share a repeatable framework, but also hopefully give everyone something you can take away from this back to your organization, whether your role is in digital accessibility procurement or somewhere in between, and help your team build and be an internal champion to start to deploy accessible procurement processes internally. So with that, Jeff, I get, normally I give the Disability In plug, and I do that every single day. If anyone on this call has not heard of Disability In, please visit their website. I could not shout from the rooftop enough to really consider becoming a corporate partner, join the Procure Access program, which Jeff will talk about later in the webinar. But Jeff, with that, since you're on today, I'll let you talk about Disability In and sort of who you are and what your organization does.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. So Disability In, we're a leading nonprofit, but I say we're kind of unusual in the sense that we are membership driven and we're driven by corporations. Many of our corporate partners are US based, but we have a very large global contingency as well. And we work with corporations to advance disability inclusion in business. And it's really focused around making sure that companies have the tools and resources that they need to empower their employees to accomplish more. And companies realize that when their employee base represents their customer base, there's instantly a return on investment there. And so we have all kinds of programs. We are the certifying organization for disability-owned businesses. We have a Next Gen Leaders program where students and recent grads and veterans who have the skills and at least one self-disclosed disability are mentored by members of our corporate partners for a 6-month program. We lead with accessibility, disability inclusion. We work with employee resource groups, chief diversity officers, just all kinds of aspects, anything that you can think of in regards to ensuring that employees have the tools and resources they need to create a culture where everyone, again, can fully participate. We don't want anyone leaving part of themselves at the door. When we can be our authentic selves at work each and every day, we're spending 100% of our mental effort on the task at hand. And that's really what our partners look for us for, is how to advance accessibility and disability inclusion and hire folks with disabilities.
Thank you, Jeff. I love that you're on today because you do that much better than I do. And I learned some tidbits there for when I'm introducing other organizations to Disability In as well. With that, I'll give a very brief overview of Alliant. And Alliant was really formed by merging 3 best-in-class accessibility leaders. So T-Based Communications, which is for 30 plus years been a leader in alternative format, so large flow reprint and Braille. Common Look, which has been a 20 plus year leader in PDF remediation and software to make PDF accessibility much easier. And then Accessible 360, which AP referenced earlier, also the organization I come from, where we've been a 10-year leader in digital accessibility. So with that, sort of the formation and merger of our 3 companies, we are the market leader and most trusted end-to-end accessibility company in the space, covering all forms of accessible communication, not just one single format. One thing I will also just quickly say is we are also a very proud disability and corporate partner, and I'll let Aaron talk about how we use Procure Access, which Jeff will talk about in our own procurement practices. So I just wanted to say we are a very proud member and appreciate all of the amazing work that the disability and team does. So then jumping right into the focus of our webinar today, right? The importance of procuring accessible technology. And really the goal of this, and then I'll kind of have Aaron and Jeff talk more strategically about this, but is making sure that every user of every ability should be able to navigate the digital experiences that we create. And I think a lot of us think about that in the sense of traditional digital accessibility. Is our website accessible? Are the PDFs that we're posting accessible? Is the marketing materials that we're sending out accessible? But there's this whole other giant bucket, which is third-party technology, right? I'm sure everyone on the call uses 1 or 1,000 plus third-party technologies for your external-facing customers, your internal-facing employees. And the reality is there is both inaccessibility created by those third parties, but also legal risk for your organization if those things aren't accessible either, right? And so we're really going to talk about what is both the importance of procurement and how does that fit into your broader accessibility strategy, but also best practices to ensuring you're holding those vendors and those third parties up to the standard that you require of your maybe internal teams for your customer facing digital properties and documents. So with that, I'll kind of actually, Aaron, turn it to you to talk a little bit about how we have a lot of amazing resources on our website about all these different global regulations, and we talk with customers about this every single day, as I know you do as well, Jeff, and disability, and has a lot of great resources on things like EAA, etc. But Aaron, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of how these global compliance mandates, so Section 508 to Title II to HHS to obviously EAA from a global perspective, are driving the importance of procurement accessibility as a legal mandate?
Yeah, absolutely. Something that's really quite remarkable that we've seen over recent years is that procurement accessibility requirements are being incorporated into these various laws and regulations. And so we obviously don't have time to kind of deep dive into each one of these individually, but as you can see, the Accessible Canada Act quite recently put forth new regulations, and they quite specifically include procurement accessibility requirements for large regulated organizations. Section 508 in the United States, right? Federal agencies, or if you're looking to sell your product to a federal agency, Section 508 applies to that. The European Accessibility Act, it has procurement accessibility requirements. There are accessibility requirements even in state level laws and regulations now, such as HB 21 in Colorado. And so universally across the board, there is beginning to be this understanding that in order to have a successful accessibility program, you have to address procurement in order to ensure that those third-party solutions are in fact accessible. And so we're seeing more and more these laws and regulations actually incorporating procurement accessibility requirements, requiring things such as user testing for usability, VPAT requests from the vendors, contract language, roadmaps for inaccessible third-party content, and more, all being built into these laws and regulations.
Yeah, thank you, AP. And I think the final thing I'll add is the timeline is either up or it's coming very quickly, right? The EAA deadline was last summer.
2025.
2025. And we have HHS and Title II deadlines coming up very quickly in April and May of this year. So the legal requirement is very real, and it's very important that your team is considering the legal risk when you're thinking about accessible procurement. But let's flip the script a little, right? What's motivating enterprise buyers from an accessibility perspective? And Jeff, you shared with us very recently sort of these 3 areas of control that you talk about. So do you want to jump in and talk about those areas of control that organizations have and how procurement plays into that? Because I think it's a really great way for organizations to think about how accessible procurement fits into that broader accessibility model.
Thanks, Ryan. Yes, so if we think about it, and to dive a little bit deeper for just a second on when we use the word accessibility, what we're really talking about is making sure that everyone is able to access the tools and resources that they need, either in their professional life or personal life. And many of us with disabilities need to find alternative ways to do traditional things. So AP and I both use a computer, but we use a screen reader. The screen reader reads everything aloud to us, so we're able to navigate. And we need that technology to work with the keyboard only. We don't use a mouse. It's hard to see the mouse and get to where you need to with any efficiency. So we've become power keyboard users. If that software is not coded correctly, I can't place focus on all the active elements, the buttons, the links, the form fields, with the keyboard only. So that's what we mean by just one example of accessibility. So taking that one step farther, the three areas where companies have control over the accessibility capabilities of what they're using would be digital accessibility. So the websites, companies own their websites and the content there. Mobile apps, whether it be a native app or just the Safari browser on an iOS or Android phone. And also physical space. Many companies will own their physical locations, their headquarters, retail shops. Oftentimes, they're using CBRE or JLL, the largest real estate companies and leasing companies in the world, where they lease that space. But all three of those areas, companies have a high level of control around the accessibility of those features. Now, the amount that they leverage that control brings us to an overused phrase, the accessibility maturity journey. Some companies, the Microsofts that have been doing this for over a decade, really embedding accessibility to help everyone achieve more on the planet. Those companies have very long maturity journeys. And so they're kind of leading the industry in this space. But for other companies, accessibility still tends to be kind of net new information, but they're on the journey, which is the key thing. And when we think about that, so they have control over those three areas. And I'm going to switch over to another slide that has 4 areas of control. We talked about the first 3, digital, mobile, physical space. The fourth one is what we're here to talk about today. Most companies, whether they're small, medium, or large size companies, are buying thousands of products and services on an annual basis. Now, this might surprise some of you listening. When we think of the Fortune 500 companies, there are some Fortune 50, so some of the largest companies in the United States, in the world, do not ask a single question about the accessibility capabilities of a product or service that they're purchasing on a regular basis. And the one way that they can get control over the accessibility of those products and services is through the procurement process, the purchasing process of this, and contractually obligating that vendor to ensure that their product or service, when you just talk about software, that their software is able to be used by everyone. All their employees, if it's employee facing, and or if it's customer facing. Before they put something on their website, it's their website. If they put a third-party software on there, it's still on their page. They're responsible for the accessibility of that software. So that fourth element is what we're going to talk about in detail today, the procurement area. And one of the things that we do, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, the Procure Access Initiative, is to help companies understand the why this is important, as we're talking about now, and also the how. How do you take a concept that's totally net new for many in the procurement world? And I will say, Ryan and AP, I know you'll verify this. I have yet to meet a procurement person who raises their hand and says, does anybody have any extra work right now because I'm a little slow? They are one of the most overworked, hardest working departments to turn contracts. So when we talk about adding requirements into their contracts, it's not a lightly discussed topic, right? Because it's a lot of extra, but it is so important, because if we don't ask for that control contractually, guess what? Then we're talking about a remediation process to fix something. So we don't want to buy a brand new product that's broken out of the gate for accessibility. So that's the fourth category we're going to talk about today, Ryan.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jeff. And I think another way to sort of think about that for organizations, I know it's one that you shared with Aaron and I a couple weeks ago, and it was such a great analogy, is how you think about accessibility when you're thinking about procurement specifically and how procurement plays into this as a wheel. And I think it's a really interesting way to talk about not only accessible procurement, but the broader accessibility roadmap and maturity model that you referenced. So do you want to talk about that like accessibility wheel analogy that you told us about? Because I think it could be really insightful for the audience. And also the thing, and Aaron and I talk about this a lot with clients, and I know Aaron has a lot of experience in this as well, where I think your wheel is so fascinating is like accessibility takes a lot of different pieces of the organization, right? I think too many times one champion thinks they can own everything, but they need to get other champions cross functionally in the business. So you want to talk about that accessibility wheel analogy that you have?
I do. When we think about accessibility and we think about all of the different roles in an organization, companies have business units, different business functions. They have employees, they have customers. It's just amazing when you look at your own company's org chart, all the different business units and so forth. And so we thought about how can we kind of give a visual, either an actual visual or an audible visual on this. And we came up with the accessibility wheel. And the concept is kind of simple. Imagine a bicycle wheel is round, and the round part of the wheel is what we call accessibility. In order for that wheel to roll in balance, all of the spokes have to be aligned. And each of the spokes in our analogy, our accessibility wheel, are business units within a company. If we think about the first spoke, let's say it's the business unit that is looking to take on or purchase a software program that their business unit is going to use. Oftentimes, they'll work with security to get the product so they can actually bring it in-house. They'll work with procurement to actually purchase it, and they'll test it out. If they decide that they want to buy that product, they will ask procurement to purchase it. So far we have the business unit as one spoke that's lit up, and we have procurement spoke that's now lit up. Well, let's assume that this is a software program that all of the employees need to use to track their time, to track their business expenses, for reimbursements, time off, things like that. Let's just call it like an HR system. Well, if procurement purchased it because the business unit wanted to use it, and they didn't ask any questions about the accessibility capabilities of this product, this software program. So now it is broken. It's brand new, out of the box, and it's broken from an accessibility standpoint. So employees who use assistive technologies, they have to find an alternative way to do traditional things. They're using keyboard-only navigation, whatever the scenario is. That brand new software program that they're required to use, the employees aren't able to use it. So now the employee spoke is lit up. Well, what are you going to do as an employee? If something you're required to use doesn't work, you might fake it for a while. But if your job performance starts, failing or whatever the case might be, you go to your manager. So now the manager spoke is lit up. Well, that manager is going to go to HR. Now we illuminate the HR spoke. HR is going to go to the accommodations team. That spoke is now illuminated. The employee might feel like their back is to the wall because they're starting to not be able to take their phone calls with customers or whatever their role is. They might reach out to the employee resource group. So now the ERG spoke is lit up. And, depending on the scenario, they might, legal might get involved. IT is going to get involved because is there a workaround? So now we got the IT spoke lit up. And you can kind of see how this just cascades. And all of these different spokes are lighting up because our accessibility wheel is now out of alignment because we didn't ask if our employees are able to use this product before we buy it and put it into the employee ecosystem. Now let's just fast forward. Let's make the analogy that this amazing company has a procurement accessibility program in place, and they asked questions when they were going through the vendor selection process. It helped to find vendors who were able to meet the business needs of the business unit, but also this particular vendor stood out from the others because they were focusing in on accessibility capabilities. So now the business unit benefits from this vendor who has accessibility capabilities built in, because think of a curb cut on a sidewalk. It's designed for folks who use mobility devices, walkers, wheelchairs, whatever, but don't you all benefit from a curb cut? You don't have to step down and so forth. If you're running, walking, strollers, whatever the case might be, when a vendor makes their product more accessible, it's not just for people like me and AP who have disabilities, it's for everybody. Texting, designed right for a means of effective communication for individuals who are deaf, hard of hearing. I'll bet a month's salary. Some of you have texted while we're talking today. It benefits everyone. So when that vendor creates more accessible products and services, the business unit, the entire employee base, the entire company benefits. All those folks that were illuminated, guess what? They're dim now because they didn't need to get involved, because procurement and the organization asked about the accessibility and went with the vendor who met the business needs, but also was leading with accessibility. That's what we consider the accessibility wheel.
No, and I think that's great, Jeff. And I think that visual and that talk through is just so perfect. And I think it's ironic, right? We're talking about procurement today, and that example's so perfect, but it's so many things in accessibility, right? Where it just tends to snowball when you don't ask the question or don't consider the potential barriers or the problems that creates. So really appreciate you going through that wheel, because I think just seeing that visual and hearing that visual, it does show how simple it sounds. Really, challenging, but simply asking the question and thinking about those downstream scenarios can really prevent, at least to some extent, that big cascade effect that you just talked through. So with that, we're going to kind of flip the script completely and talk about, like, how can you build a framework for a repeatable process? And AP, I'll ask you to jump in really quickly before we even get into the actual sort of framework pieces in the steps that we're going to talk about specifically here, but maybe like any experience and wins that you saw at the University of Montana, because again, as you said, that's where you got your start in accessibility, basically doing this, right, and being part of that framework process. So anything you have in reference to Jeff's wheel scenario that maybe didn't go well, and sort of how you can speak to the audience on that.
Yeah, absolutely. When the University of Montana received a complaint through the Office of Civil Rights alleging that the university was using inaccessible electronic and information technology, they were required to implement a procurement accessibility program, including actual software testing by a user with disabilities. And they happened to realize that they had a blind student working at the IT help desk there at the time. And so they asked me if I would be interested in doing that testing. And so that is actually how I started in the accessibility space. But what we found was having one person doing software accessibility testing for a campus of 15,000 students, but the backlog began to form very, very quickly, right? And all of these various stakeholders that you see reflected in the accessibility wheel, they wield political power, so to speak, right? And so what we found, frustratingly, was at times, because of this backlog, because it very quickly reached a point to where it was 6 to 8 weeks for us to be able to reach out to a vendor, get access to the documentation, get access to the software, conduct testing, write the report, draft an equally effective alternative access plan. That time, you started to see these kind of various stakeholders leverage their political power to circumvent the accessibility requirements, right? Or to do things like purchasing software using a P card and avoiding the formal procurement request program, right? All of these kind of means to circumvent the accessibility program. And so, that was definitely something we saw very quickly as we began to implement a procurement accessibility program. And so, finding a third-party solution to help with that overflow was certainly something that was important to us. Also, finding ways to narrow the gap, right? To whittle down, what do we really need to test, right? Who's using it? What is the impact going to be? And I'm probably skipping ahead a little bit to what we'll talk about more. But something that we found was a very big success for us was developing parameters under which we would test software, right? If a piece of software is only going to be used by 3 or 4 individuals in the biology department, right? Do we truly need to take that time to access the software to do the testing when we know realistically the software is most likely not going to be accessible, right? As opposed to software that's going to be used campus wide, right? A new course catalog tool that will be accessed by all students, right? That is something very important to assess. And so this one thing that was a success is using that to kind of whittle down that workload, so to speak. So that's what I would say when I think about kind of wins and losses in my time at the University of Montana. I would say those are the two things that really stand out, that backlog that formed and how we were able to work around it.
No, I appreciate you going through that because I think that really dovetails very nicely into this framework that we're going to talk about today. So with step one, Jeff, I'm gonna throw it to you. It's something you referenced earlier, both through the framework as well as the accessibility wheel. And I think that step one is just ask the question, right? Require a VPAT ACR, ask them where they're at in accessibility. So anything to add to that, it sounds so simple, right? But if you're doing nothing for procurement accessibility today, sometimes just asking the question and requiring that VPAT ACR as part of your procurement process can at least very quickly kind of give you that sort of understanding of, is this vendor know anything about accessibility, or are they doing a great job with accessibility? So you want to talk a little bit about just asking the question?
I do. I'll give a real life scenario, and that is, this is a Jeff statistic. I'll bet majority of the time, a business unit falls in love with the product. They get it into the enterprise and they test it out. And then generally speaking, what happens is the business unit will go to procurement and say, yeah, we tested this, we want to buy it. And then the procurement department will purchase it. And if at the very beginning stages of their accessibility program, they might reach out to 1 or 2 people if there are leading accessibility efforts for that company, and they'll say, hey, we're getting ready to buy this, can you test it for accessibility? And it's kind of a head scratcher because business unit already fell in love with it. Procurement is just waiting to get the contract signed. And if we didn't ask any questions about this product, giving the accessibility person a day or two to evaluate it, may find issues with accessibility flaws, but there's really not a lot of time to fix anything. The business unit's already moving forward. So moving everything not only left, but up, and building accessibility into the process, into the whole ideation, development process, and implementation process. So moving left and shifting it up. If we have in the RFP, the request for work, with the vendors, a couple of questions, and you can build your maturity of the questions over time. One thing I want to highlight, many of the corporations that we have the opportunity to work with, you would think Fortune 50, Fortune 100s, they got all this stuff figured out. It's all buttoned up before they do anything. That's not really always the case. Adding a couple of accessibility questions into the RFP process, it does wonders because it helps the procurement team, it helps the business unit, it helps the accessibility team to get a sense of if that vendor is doing anything around accessibility, making their product more usable for individuals. If they aren't doing anything, but another vendor with a similar product is doing something for accessibility, getting that discovery process at the very beginning of the process is magic wand. We don't expect all vendors to be 100% perfect with this or 100% usable. In fact, if we look at any company that you can think of that you're using their software today, every one of them has some accessibility issues. It's a journey that every company is on. The goal initially with the questions up front is simply to get the dialogue started with that vendor. And every company that's buying products on the other side is also selling other products or services. This is a collaboration between buyers and sellers. So it's really important to get the conversation started. One of the easiest ways is with questions in the RFP process. Working with the vendor, because we're all vendors, but we're all buyers too. That collaboration helps to make that vendor understand the benefits. For you, the company that's buying it, it's going to make the product that you're buying work better for your employees or your customers. But at the same time, that vendor, when the light bulb moment, Ryan, goes off and that vendor realizes, wow, a Fortune 500 is pushing us on this. It's a hassle up front, but they're helping us realize that there's 499 other Fortune 500 companies that if we get this right, it's going to separate us out from our competition. Thank you for pushing us through this and making us realize how important this is. The magic wand or the magic light bulb moment is when that vendor then starts in their sales process with the next company and they start leading with, oh, and we make sure that our products are able to be used by everybody. It gives me chills when I think about that. We see it time and time again. So it's a win-win-win scenario when we just start asking about the accessibility.
No, I think that's such a perfect overview, Jeff. And I think, a lot of the stuff in the rest of this framework and process, I think you said something earlier, right? Procurement teams are way too busy. Accessibility teams internally are way too small. We all know that, right? But simply asking questions in your RFP and procurement process is very simple, right? Most organizations could at least start that next week, right? Just asking the question can have such a snowball effect. And I think, we talk with a lot of our customers, and Jeff, to the end of your part there where you talked about that mentality shift, right? We did a webinar fairly recently with one of our big software clients, Infinite Campus, who's a student information system and supports tens of millions of students across the US. And that's exactly what they talked about, right? Early on, accessibility and all these mandates, and the question was maybe not annoying, I don't want to speak for them, but it was challenging. Now they're leading with accessibility and it's winning them business. So it's I know it can be hard to ask the question, and it can be, maybe it seems annoying that you have to ask it, but you do have to, right? And it will move the needle downstream. So with that, we're actually going to shift to kind of what you talked about, at least to an extent, Jeff, is like, how do you evaluate those VPAT ACRs? And Andre, I saw a fantastic question in the chat, so we're going to answer this one live. And AP, so I'm going to jump to you to talk about, so you get a VPAT ACR, like how should you articulate those, right? A lot of them, they should, like a red flag might be that they 100% support compliance, as Jeff alluded to, right? No product's 100% accessible, but I'll quickly state Andre's question, because then we can answer it live as part of this slide of how you can start to decipher those VPAT ACRs. So Andre's question was, we have EU vendors who provide a voluntary product accessibility template, a VPAT. How much confidence should I place in their claims of compliance? And I think that's a great question, and one that you're going to talk to on this slide, AP. So I'll let you jump in.
Fantastic question, and it's very valid, right? The V in VPAT stands for voluntary, right? Never forget that, right? And so how accurate, how complete these are, how much they choose to disclose is entirely voluntary in these documents, right? So never forget that. Some things to really kind of keep in mind, right? You notice that on our slide here and how we talk about it, we use the phrase VPAT ACR, right? And that phrase, we use it for a reason, and that is because the template is called VPAT, Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. When one of them is filled out, when one of them is completed, it is called an accessibility conformance report, right? However, that term accessibility conformance report gets used a lot for things that are not made using the VPAT template, right? So if a vendor gives you something called an accessibility conformance report, one of the first things you need to question or to look for is, okay, well, is this accessibility conformance report actually built using the voluntary product accessibility template, right? Because it doesn't necessarily have to be. You can call anything you want an accessibility conformance report, but for it to really be official, it needs to be based on the voluntary product accessibility template, the VPAT, right? So that is why we use that phrase VPAT ACR. So one of those first bullets that you see here is it based on the correct ITI template, the Information Technology Industry Council? They are the organization that actually develops and maintains the voluntary product accessibility template. Something else to keep in mind is look at product version, right? If the VPAT is for version 1.9, but the current version that you're about to buy is 2.4, that VPAT is probably not applicable, right? As opposed to if that VPAT is for version 1.9.1 and you're about to acquire 1.9.2, it might be much more relevant, right? So versioning is something to keep in mind. You know, in the day and age that we live in of cloud-based apps, finding version information can be a lot more difficult. And so in that case, lean on the timeline, right? How old is that VPAT? You think about how rapidly technology changes and evolves these days. If a VPAT is older than 12 months, how likely is that to really be accurate, right? Have they not made significant changes to their software in 12 months? And truly, it doesn't take a significant change to break accessibility, right? So if a VPAT is simply too old, that is something to be wary of. You know, look for who did it, right? Who made this VPAT? That I think, to the question that we had in the chat, is probably one of the best indicators as to how much stock you should put in to one of these, is who made the VPAT, right? Does it have a badge or a vendor name? Does it say Alliant or Level Access, DQ, whomever, any kind of third-party vendor in the space? If it's done and created by a third-party vendor, then you know, certainly in my mind, I'm sure Jeff, you would agree with this, right? It gives it far more credibility than if the VPAT is simply created by somebody in the company's own development team, right? Somebody in the company's own development team is not going to be fluent in accessibility, and they're going to be like, you know, have a kind of bias towards the software that will make it probably look better than what it actually is. What type of testing, right? The VPAT template specifically has a section for this. What you are looking for is a combination of live manual testing using assistive technologies by persons with disabilities combined with automated scanning, right? If it's only based on automated scanning, that is a red flag. If it's only based on live user testing, I would consider that better than only based on automated scanning. But really, you should have both. That is what you are kind of looking for in the how is this VPAT created section of the document. You know, look at the answers, right? Are they complete? Does it seem like they're just box checking? Are there any comments? The VPAT template has a section for every success criteria to include kind of notes and comments, right? How much detail is being included in there? That is something else to really kind of keep in mind. You know, if the product supports every criteria, right? That is something else that should be a red flag. And I believe if, Ryan, we go ahead and move on to the next slide, we talk a little bit more about that specifically. You know, looking beyond those supports ratings. You know, I loved the fact that Jeff mentioned Microsoft earlier, right? And a fantastic example of an organization with a very mature accessibility program, right? Go and pull a VPAT for Microsoft Word, Microsoft Windows, PowerPoint, Excel, OneDrive, Teams, any of these applications that we all are using on a very regular basis. I use Teams at Alliant every single day. But if I were to go pull those VPATs, I'm going to find a mixture of supports, partially supports, does not support. It will have comments documenting what is supported, what isn't supported, and why. why. That is a reflection of a mature accessibility program, right? They're being honest with you about the actual accessibility state rather than just looking to check the box, right? So if you see a VPAT that just says supports on every success criteria, really automatic red flag, right? Anybody who's worked in the accessibility space long enough, think to yourself, have you ever encountered a truly 100% accessible website or a 100% piece of accessible software? I can find accessibility issues in just about anything if I go and I'm looking hard enough, right? So there is just no such thing as perfection. So automatic red flag if it says supports on every single thing. And watch that not evaluated flag. Technically that should only be used in very specific circumstances, like if the template has WCAG 2.2 but you only audited and are working to 2.1, or say you don't have video content on your site, then you might say not evaluated under captions and audio descriptions. But otherwise you really shouldn't see a lot of not evaluated, right? Those level A and level AA requirements in the VPAT, those should all really be reviewed and have some state in it: support, partially support, and does not support. So with that, Ryan, I'll hand it back to you.
No, that's perfect. And we answered a number of questions in the Q&A live, so I'm trying to keep up with that. And it was a great description because you answered, I think, 3 of the questions live, AP, that we were getting relative to sort of how to assess, how should we be thinking about this when we get one, take it at face value, etc. So with that, and keeping us on track with the limited time we have left, and I think, and I don't have to do much talking today, but I can speak for AP and Jeff. I think they could both talk about this topic for 3 hours, so we'll try to keep it to 60. But Jeff, I think one thing we wanted to jump to in the framework next is like not thinking about accessibility as a checklist and really assessing risk based on impact. And I know you have experience both with the many corporate partners you work with the disability in, but also your direct experience in the enterprise space and building a procurement program at the enterprise space. Like, how did you think about that? And how do you, consult with organizations on, to your point earlier, some organizations might have tens of thousands of things they procure and they can't test everything. So any tips and tricks on assessing, risk based on impact to the organization?
Absolutely. I first want to start out with a quote from a friend of ours. Chris Brody used to be head of accessibility at Mars M&M's brand. And Chris recognized that there were some accessibility opportunities in his business unit. And he thought to himself, why not now? And why not me? And I share that right now as I'm getting ready to talk about this topic, because anyone that's listening, you don't have to have a title of accessibility or procurement in your organization. If you recognize that there are opportunities to enhance accessibility within your company, why not now and why not you to raise this conversation? It can be raising it to your manager to talk about accessibility and and see where that goes. One of the things I think that we find is accessibility in many, many companies starts organically. It's not senior leadership saying, oh, here's all the resources you need, here's all the headcount. Now you and you go make all these things happen. It doesn't work that way in most cases. We build a business case, we recognize the needs, and we try to get that senior leadership support and so forth, and it works up from the bottom up. That's more common than you might imagine. And so many companies only have 1 to 5 people full-time working on accessibility. And for a lot of folks listening, you might think, wow, I wish I had 5 people. All this being said, I think it's really just a matter of starting somewhere, and working with the employee resource groups, working with the accommodations team at the company, and asking questions. It's really a matter, I think, Ryan, of just getting started. And once the conversation starts, the other thing that I highly recommend, I personally did this before I started at Disability In. I learned about Disability In about 8 years ago. I was doing some Google searching, and I came across this thing called the Disability Index. And the Disability Index rates what leading companies are doing in like 10 categories. So I used that as my roadmap. I had no title. I was an individual contributor as a certified financial planner on the phones. But I saw that and I thought, wow, I have a roadmap on how to ask questions. And one of them was around procurement. And it gave me that knowledge of why not now and why not me? There were some issues, I don't want to be that person who can't use a product and feel less than if I let myself because of an accessibility barrier in a software program that I have to use. I didn't create that issue. I still have talents and skills, but if there's a barrier in my way, we need everybody that's listening to think about this and just start asking the questions of what can be done. So bottom line, just getting started, asking questions about accessibility is how I would answer that question to get started. And then it builds out a framework. I mean, once you get involved with procurement, there's a whole scenario of things that can be done. Asking questions in the RFP process, getting accessibility requirement language in contracts, working with procurement to start tracking what they're doing. And I'm getting a little off topic, but the other thing that I highly recommend too is for anyone that is in this accessibility space, ask your own internal departments, what are we being asked about the accessibility capabilities of our products and services? I would bet, there are some contracts that companies have where you're being asked as the vendor for someone else, what are you able to meet as far as accessibility capabilities? That is a huge way to start the conversation because you want to make sure that if your company is committing to something, that you have the resources to back it up, right? And to make sure that accessibility is going to be something that's able to be delivered. I'll pause there.
No, that's perfect, Jeff. You covered the next slides. It's almost like you knew what was coming. And then we'll talk a little bit about Procure Access on the last few slides of the webinar as well. So with that, because you answered that one perfectly, AP, the kind of last step in our framework, let's call it, is creating a standardized process for procuring accessible technology. And one of the things that I kind of want you to just bring, because I know we're short on times, but I think this is such an important part of this is even how we've built this here at Alliant, right? And sort of built this into our framework. And I would tell you, and I'll just give AP a big shout out. I'll give Jeff a big shout out for all of the amazing work and things he's taught me through the Procure Access program. I will just give myself credit. A couple weeks ago, we were procuring a new sales enablement tool for our sales team. And I asked the question and the vendor initially shelled up, but here we are 2 weeks later, they're working on getting the product tested by our team and getting a VPAT ACR as part of that contract process. So I bring that up because AP, I'm going to have you talk about live our values and how we've implemented the Procure Access program here at Alliant to hold our vendors accountable, ask the question. And I know it can seem like a barrier, but to Jeff's points earlier, if we don't ask the question, vendors don't get held accountable. And a lot of times vendors are pretty receptive to doing this. So AP, do you want to talk a little bit about creating a standardized process for procurement?
Yeah, absolutely. The great thing is, as an accessibility vendor, we have a great many persons with disabilities, screen reader users, other assistive technology users on staff. And so that concern about having the ability to do that testing, we're a little bit more fortunate than others in that position, right? And so we developed our own internal process for reviewing the accessibility of software we're looking to procure. We ask for a VPAT. We have contract language that we're aware of. A lot of it is just simply having the relationships in place, having awareness so people know. At the university, we formalized it in ways such as locking down the procurement process. So automatically, anytime a procurement request was submitted, it automatically went to accessibility. At Alliant, we mostly just have good relationships, and when somebody is needing to procure a piece of software, our own digital group can review that. And so they will request the VPAT, they will conduct usability testing on it. We actually generate a color-coded report, green, yellow, red, that kind of indicates how usable is it based on the testing that we did. We identify accessibility issues, and then we provide that information to the vendor whose software it is that we are looking to procure, right? And so that is how we review software here at Alliant. And we actually took this process of how we go about reviewing software and turned it into a solution that we can actually offer to customers as well, which we call Procure. And I think we'll talk probably a little bit more about that on a future slide, right?
We will. And so with that, because normally AP and I have to give the overview of Procure Access. Jeff, do you want to
Mhm.
talk a little bit about Procure Access? Because again, that's what we've deployed here internally, and I think it's just an amazing resource for everyone in this space.
Absolutely. My previous answer, I just talked, initially about how individuals can make a difference in all this. There were three key individuals. Lainey Feingold, who's an accessibility rights attorney. She's like the bee's knees in this space. Larry Goldberg, formerly of Yahoo, WGBH Boston, and Sarah Basson from Google. And they were talking about a product that both of their, Google and Yahoo purchased, and it was broken out of the box for accessibility. And that conversation led to, well, then we're using this other product and same scenario, major companies, right? And so they got together and started figuring out, well, how can we hold vendors accountable? And I was starting this at the financial firm and came across those three amazing leaders. And Procure Access started by about 24 companies. We got together and we're talking about how do we solve this problem of all of our companies buying a lot of the same software. And I'll digress for just a second. We're talking corporations. Big university systems are corporations. I mean, they have billions of dollars, right, of business. So it's not just a business to business thing, it's a government thing, it's a university thing. We're all buying things. And so we worked together and built this amazing toolkit. So if you go to disabilityin.org and the Procure Access toolkit is there, it has everything from soup to nuts to take a Fortune 100 company that has nothing in place or a Microsoft that has a wonderful program in place, and how do you enhance it? So the Procure Access Toolkit is everything corporations and organizations need to start asking the questions. There's sample language in there. We even have building block videos where corporate leaders are sharing what they've done. Again, keep in mind, this is collaborative. As AP and Ryan mentioned, you got to work with a vendor. We're all vendors and we're all buyers. When we have the understanding of why this is important and the benefits of doing this, it moves mountains. So the Procure Access Toolkit has everything you need to get to start it, whether you're a team of one or you have a big team. Use the Procure Access Toolkit to help build out your program and then start reaping the benefits of all those spokes in our accessibility wheel not lighting up because procurement was started. Our saying is when procurement leads, accessibility will follow. So the Procure Access Toolkit is everything that you need.
No, and I think that answered a couple of the questions, and I was typing that in the Q&A as well, that Disability and Procure Access is a free resource that is out there. We are happy to provide that link. Obviously, Jeff is as well, but you can reach out to our team. We'll get you that. I could not recommend the Procure Access program enough, and I know, like I said, I put that in a lot of the Q&A as well. So, Adrian, we have like 2 minutes left, and we got a few slides to get to, but do you want to and I know this is going to be the hardest question you get all month, in 30 seconds, talk about how we use our own Procure Ensure process here at Alliant and have built a procurement accessibility service specific to kind of dovetailing off of Procure Access in Procure Ensure.
Yeah, absolutely. And as an organization who's committed to accessible procurement, we at Alliance signed on to the Procure Access statement. So we are a very proud Procure Access signatory. And in order to live up to that, we implemented that Procure Ensure process that I mentioned earlier, where our live user testers actually go in, they identify issues, they do usability testing of actual user paths, they create the color-coded report, green, yellow, red. It basically reflects the overall usability of it. And we actually turned that into a service that customers can come to Alliant and request a Procure Ensure assessment of a third-party piece of software that they're looking to review. If we can get access to the product's VPAT as well, while we conduct that usability testing for you, we will also do a VPAT validation where we are basically having the VPAT open on another screen. And as we are testing, we're looking to see, does what we see in our testing align with what they are saying in the VPAT? Is it accurate? Is it complete? Is it timely? We check for some of those other things that we talked about earlier: completeness, age, versioning, that type of thing. So you actually, if you come to us for a procure assessment, and the product has a VPAT, we will both review the software, provide that color-coded report, and we will review the product's VPAT as well. So hopefully that was close to 30 seconds, Ryan. Back to you.
That was great. That was great. And we had a lot of amazing Q&A. I tried to either hit the answer live button or type in an answer. So thank you all for the Q&A. We truly appreciate the engagement. Makes this more engaging for us as well. If we did not get to your question, we will be following up with you directly, get you an answer to that question after the webinar. And as I typed to many of you, we have a lot of amazing resources, and we're happy to jump on a call and dive specifically one-on-one deeper into this conversation as well. So with that, I've referenced the third-party digital product procurement guide quite a few times in the Q&A. We can send that to you via email if you would like, but we also have a QR code on the screen, and that is live on our website, so you can access that at any time. With that, I know we're at 3:01, and I knew we would fill the time with the amazing individuals that I got to sort of quarterback today in Jeff and AP. So Jeff, huge thank you to you for spreading your amazing wealth of knowledge on procurement and joining Aaron and I on today's webinar. AP, thank you for jumping on with me and making my job easy and talking with Jeff about all of your experience in procurement accessibility. And also a huge thank you to everyone that joined the webinar today or watches the recording in post. If you have any questions for us at Alliant or for Jeff and the Disability In team, and you're even interested in, leveraging Procure Access or becoming a Disability In corporate partner, please reach out to either of our teams, and we would be happy to help you. But with that, thank you all for attending, and we hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.